2021. Join the process. Let your voice be heard.
Welcome to the viewers and listeners from not only locally but from the diaspora to the 4th Joint Select Committee virtual town hall meetings. As we have indicated, this is a sit-in of the Joint Select Committee, and a number of members are here with us. Also the technical team from the Office of the Prime Minister, and a number or most of our members have joined us virtually. This afternoon, we welcome all the viewers and listeners and hope that you can participate by sending in questions via social media or via the media that are with us this afternoon. This afternoon, we will be detailing and responding to a number of questions which still remain unanswered. Not only will we answer those questions, but any additional questions that are posed, we will try to answer them this afternoon. Failing that, we will answer them next week. These virtual meetings are intended to engage the public, you, the members of the public. We feel, as members of the Joint Select Committee, that the members of the public can participate, can feel that the various issues, the various concerns, the doubts that one would have about this NIDS bill, that you can raise them so we can respond to them. Because once these sessions are finished, we debate them at the Joint Select Committee, send a report to Parliament, and Parliament debate and pass this bill. We want you, members of the public, to feel confident that you can enroll in the NIDS bill. We have gone through most sections of the bill, but because we have new listeners, new viewers, we will go over several sections. But in addition, we will deal with additional areas of the bill. In particular, as I indicated yesterday, we want to touch on the NIRA, N-I-R-A, that is the National Identification and Registration Authority. This is the body that will be responsible for the enrollment, for the real protection and securing of the data, and basically that's the body that will be totally responsible for everything under this bill. But in addition, we have an appeal tribunal which is detailed in the 2nd schedule. And in the 3rd schedule, we have an inspectorate, and that inspectorate will ensure that the NIRA, that is the first body in the 1st schedule, carries out its work properly. So a lot is in store, and we hope we will engage, enlighten, and really excite you this afternoon as we discuss additional provisions of this bill. With me this afternoon are some members of the committee. As I indicated, most are actually online. We have Ministers Aubin Hill and Marsha Smith. We are expected to be joined by Minister Johnson Smith any minute now. And we have once again with us Member of Parliament from Clarendon, Mr. Dwight Sibbles. We also have the technical team from the Office of the Prime Minister, Mrs. Sharika Hemmings-Alliser, Mrs. Janelle Miller-Williams, the Director, Mr. Warren Vernon, and from the Law Reform Department of the Ministry of Justice, Ms. Nadine Wilkins. But as usual, the person who will be engaging you, members of the public, is a professional, a communicator, and that is, I introduce once again the moderator, Ms. Kimberly McLeod.
Thank you ever so much, Minister. Again, please allow me to extend my own welcome to those of you watching us on PBCJ, JIS TV, Scene TV, and on social media, the NIDS Facts pages, the Prime Minister's Twitter and Facebook pages, that is at Andrew Holness JM, and to those of you listening to us on NCU FM and Newstalk 93 FM and other media. Over the next 90 minutes, we will be going through the Voluntary National Identification and Registration Bill 2020. Remember to use the hashtag JSCNIDS to participate. Before we get into the bill, however, we do have a quick video recap of what has been shared so far. And this is on, as Senator Aubin Hill described it yesterday, our new unique national identification system. And so we will have that video recap now.
You've probably heard of the National Identification System, or NIDS. Here are a few facts to help you understand even better.
What is the NIDS?
The National Identification System, or NIDS, is made up of the National Identification Databases, the National Identification Number, or NIN, the National Identification Card, or the NIC, and all the processes, networks, services, and measures associated with the enrollment of the individuals and the verification of identity.
What are the objectives of the NIDS bill?
The proposed objectives of this bill include providing for the enrollment of eligible individuals in the National Identification Databases, the assignment and use of the NIN or NIN, and the issue of an NIC or NIC to enrolled individuals, and the prevention of identity theft and other types of fraud relating to identity information. The NIDS is proposed to create a secure and reliable way of proving the identity of enrolled individuals through the use of a single document, a national identification card.
So how can I sign up for enrollment?
Citizens of Jamaica and individuals who are resident in Jamaica will be eligible for enrollment. A resident is one who has lived in Jamaica for a continuous period of 6 months immediately prior to applying for enrollment, or if the individual has been granted permission under immigration laws to enter and remain in Jamaica for the purpose of study.
How can I sign up?
Eligible individuals may apply to the authority for enrollment. The authority will be required to inform the individual that enrollment is voluntary and that the individual may cancel enrollment at any time. The authority will also be required to say why the information is being collected, the purpose for which the information will be used, the steps to be taken by the authority to verify the information, the individual's right of access to the information, and the right of the individual to appeal any decision made by the authority concerning the identity information of that individual. The bill takes into account the different types of individuals who may wish to enroll. For example, minors, individuals who are in places of safety, persons in correctional institutions, mentally incapable individuals, and those who are in the Witness Protection Program. For the purposes of enrollment, it is proposed that biographic, biometric, and numerical information may be required to be collected by the authority. The biographic information of the individual includes their full name, their date of birth, whether the individual is male or female, their marital status, as well as their occupation. The biometric information refers to the facial image, fingerprints, and manual signature where the applicant is 18 years and older. By way of numbers, the individual's taxpayer's registration number, passport number, or electoral registration number may be collected where applicable.
What's the idea behind an NIN?
Now, the National Identification Number, or NIN. It is proposed that a unique NIN will be permanently assigned and the National Identification Card, or the NIC, will be issued to every enrolled individual whose information has been verified by the authority. The NIN will be randomly selected and the digits will not relate to any attribute of the enrolled individual. The number will not be assigned or reassigned to any individual. It is unique to you. Importantly, the NIN may not be cancelled and remains assigned to one individual even after that person has died. The NIC, or the card, is proposed to be the proof of identity of the enrolled individual, which will not be transferable to any other person.
If I sign up, can I cancel at any time?
An enrolled individual may request cancellation of enrollment at any time, and the authority must cancel the enrollment. Where the cancellation is upon the request of the individual, it is proposed that the identity information will no longer be processed unless the authority is mandated to do so under the Data Protection Act. It may also cancel enrollment if the information in the National Identification Database is inaccurate. Once enrollment is cancelled, the authority must advise the individual of the cancellation, and that person is no longer entitled to use the NIN. Additionally, the NIC or the card issued to that individual must be surrendered. If the individual chooses to re-enroll, that person will be issued with the same NIN.
Very thorough explanation there. Very, very good. And welcome back. If you are just joining us, we just concluded a quick recap on the NIDS, and now we are going to go into some more details as to which entity will be managing the NIDS. I'm going to ask Mrs. Hemmings Allison, would you quickly take us through the clauses that facilitate the establishment of the authority that will be managing the NIDS?
Kimberly, good afternoon, moderator, good afternoon, chairman, members of the committee, colleagues, and to the listening public. So clause 5 of the bill, it establishes a national identification and registration authority, which it says shall be a body corporate to which the provisions of section 28 of the Interpretation Act applies. And so what this means is that the authority will be a body corporate which can sue and which can be sued in its own name. And if we look at clause 5.2, it says there is hereby established within the authority an office to be known as the Office of the Registrar General, which under the management and control of the authority will be responsible for carrying out the functions of the Registrar General. So that's a clause which establishes the National Identification Registration Authority.
Awesome, thank you. So what is the proposed structure of the National Identification Registration Authority? Can you also explain the governance structure for the independent oversight body?
Sure. So clause 5 would have established the authority, and clause 6 establishes the board of management, and specifically the organization structure entails a board of management which will be responsible for overseeing the general administration of the authority. And in particular, this board of management will ensure that the operations of the authority are in conformity with the Data Protection Act and any other laws that relate to the operations of the authority. Additionally, the board will give directions to the Chief Executive Officer of the authority in respect of the management of the authority. The Board of Management will comprise 15 members, 4 of whom will be ex officio members, and the remaining 11 will be appointed by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister after he consults with the Leader of the Opposition. And so if we look at part 2 of the first schedule, it provides further details about the composition of the board and the proceedings of the board. It is further proposed that the board, after consultation with the minister, will appoint a chief executive officer of the authority, as well as such number of deputy chief executive officers as it deems appropriate. The chief executive officer will be responsible for the day-to-day administration and management of the authority, and it will be responsible for the operations of the Office of the Registrar General to ensure that the authority's operations are carried out in an efficient and effective manner. And it's also important to point out to the public that the CEO will also perform such other functions that the Board of Management may assign to him or her. Kimberly, what I would like to point the public's attention to is the National Databases Inspectorate. And if we recall the Supreme Court's ruling, we noted that the Supreme Court was concerned about, among other things, the fact that there was no independent oversight body mandated to conduct an audit of the authority and take action where it found that individuals or the authority itself violated the provisions of the then Act. And so with this new bill, we look, for example, at clauses 27 as well as the third schedule of the bill. You will see that provisions have been made for the establishment of this independent oversight body, which is called the National Databases Inspectorate. And so just to pick out some of the salient provisions in that clause, it is proposed in clause 27 that the inspectorate will do quite a bit of things. One, for example, is to monitor compliance with the Act, monitor the performance of the authority, and assess the implementation of best practices concerning the functions of the authority. It will also conduct periodic inspections of the authority and to determine whether its operations are being conducted within the purview of the laws which relate to the confidentiality and privacy of identity information. The inspectorate will also give to the Board of Management such directions and advice as may be appropriate to ensure that identity information collected by the authority or stored in the national databases is subject to the highest practicable levels of security and confidentiality. And it is also important to point out that the authority will have the function of investigating any issue or complaints regarding the conduct or operations of the authority that is brought to its attention. And finally, or maybe not so finally, but clause 27.3 of the bill proposes to grant power to the authority to require the attendance before it any officer or agent of the authority or any subcontractor of any such agent, and it will also call for and examine any information other than identity information that the inspectorate considers necessary. And what I want to highlight is the fact that the authority too will audit the operations of the authority. The inspectorate will audit the operations of the authority, and it includes the processes for the collection and storage of data, and it will determine whether the information is maintained in keeping with data protection and information privacy standards. So, in essence, the inspectorate will be required to submit to the minister annually and submit to the Information Commissioner under the Data Protection Act on a quarterly basis a report on its functions. So in essence, that is the governance structure that is being proposed.
Thank you ever so much for that very fulsome response. So we got a visual representation of the structure of the NIRO, which is a new acronym we're introducing today. And we have noted that a number of corrective steps have been taken arising from the ruling to make the bill and the systems overseeing the NIDS more robust. So there are a number of checks and balances, and we're very happy to hear that. Now, in respect of the RGD, that is the Registrar General's Department, will it be transformed, or I'm so sorry. So the RGD will be transformed to this authority, the NIRO. Is that the case?
So in respect of the transformation of the RGD, and I had indicated a bit earlier that the bill proposes to establish within the authority an office to be called the Office of the Registrar General. And what will happen is that the functions of the Registrar General now will be transferred to that office.
Right.
Yes. So in essence, transformation will take place, but in terms of the yes, so transformations will take place.
Fabulous. That was actually going to be my next question. What of the current functions of the Registrar General's Department? All right. So essentially, the NIRO will be responsible for enrollment into the NIDS?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, the NIRO will be responsible for enrollment.
Right. This is indeed very exciting. Can we move now into where persons may go in order to be able to enroll for their NIDS ID card?
And good afternoon, everybody. the proposed National Identification and Registration Authority will establish initially 24 enrollment sites strategically located across all parishes. If there is a need, we will scale up, and we are using existing government infrastructure, partnering with PICA and Jamaica Post to establish these sites. Once the authority is in place, those sites will be published once the authority is set up. Thank you.
Will you also have sort of roving registration sites? I mean, there are many areas in Jamaica, in the rural areas, where it's very expensive to travel to the capital, for example. Do you propose to have mobile units?
Yes, a very good question, Chairman. We will have mobile enrollment stations set up to move around, but initially our mobile sites were specifically designed for persons with special needs, maybe persons with disabilities, persons who are at home and unable to go to the enrollment sites, youth groups, community groups, where you can have group enrollment, or corporate offices. So we have that as part of the plan.
Great to know. And just to repeat, there will be 24 enrollment sites across the island with the capacity or the potential for upgrading as the need arises, as well as mobile units to facilitate those who are unable to visit those locations. Very, very exciting. Mr. Vernon, could you please guide us through the enrollment process? What does this look like?
Okay, thank you again, Kimberly, for that question. So the enrollment process is divided into a pre-enrollment and also an inline enrollment. And the pre-enrollment, the entire enrollment process is similar to the process that is used to apply for your visa. So so similar to the process that you will go onto the U.S. Embassy website and you supply information initially, we will have something like that where you supply all of the information as required on the law online, and once that process is completed, you will get a reference number, and you will also receive an appointment date. And on your appointment date, you will visit the enrollment site for your biometric information, or in other words, your fingerprints and your facial image to be taken. And the enrollment officer and the supervisor will carry out additional vetting, and once that is done, they will associate the information collected with your facial image, your birth certificate, and also your fingerprints. That information will be transferred to a remote site for an additional 6 layers of vetting, and once approved, the card will go to production, and the card will be produced. We say personalized. Some persons may say the card will be printed. Then it will be shipped to the enrollment site and the customer will be noted. Citizen or ordinary resident will be notified via maybe text messages or email. You'll go in, you'll collect your card, and you will also activate your card. And this is important because we know you do have the risk between production and transferring the card to the citizen, that it may be lost or it may be stolen, but the card will be useless. It cannot be used until the card is activated. And once the card is activated, then the citizen can now start using the card. And it's a similar process also for lost cards, renewal of cards. So if you lose your card, you definitely have to go into the enrollment site for your card to be renewed or to get the replacement card.
Tell me, in what is proposed, Vernon, is it going to be a manual registration, or is it going to... The reason I'm asking this, if you're going to be using actual manual, one of the real problems we have with data transfer is that even if the applicant puts in the right information, when it is transferred by a second person, a lot of errors creep up. So people's name get transformed into different names. How are we going to ensure that the initial application or the initial data that is collected is properly transferred into the system?
And the first control we have in place is that an enrollment officer will not be allowed to enter any data concerning the name of the individual. The name of the individual will be pulled from the civil registry, because what we're trying to do is to ensure that there's consistency between civil registry and identity. What we have now in most of the databases is that you have an officer, as you so mentioned, retyping the information, and that you definitely will have errors. In this system, an enrollment officer will not be authorized to type that information in. It must be pulled from either the civil registry or from the passport office, depending on whether you're an ordinary resident or a citizen of Jamaica. Because citizen of Jamaica, in some cases, if you weren't born in Jamaica, your data would come from PICA. But if you were born in Jamaica, then there's an entry in the civil registry for you, and we'll ensure that we pull that data. Additionally, there are a number of layers of vetting, and when we were there designing the processes, there are a number of discussions we had. We thought about the people who are not tech savvy, the people who wouldn't be able to go online and enter the data. So we are also going to make available those forms for persons in that category to fill them out. However, the control that we have in place is that the additional data sets, such as your address, information, telephone number, email addresses, those things will have to be confirmed by the enrollee. So the enrollee will have an additional screen and the enrollment officer will have another screen, and you'll see exactly what is being typed. You will see the data that is being captured, and you will have to confirm that this is the correct information before it is submitted to the system officially. So those are some of the major controls in place.
And in spite of your best effort and checks and balances, there will still be errors. How is that going to be dealt with?
So naturally, in any information system, there is always the risk for collecting incorrect information, because you can receive incorrect information from the enrollee. So there will always be a continuous process for vetting. But one thing we do know is that any error concerning your name and your date of birth, that would have to be corrected from the civil register side. So if they've gone through the appropriate vetting and your name is Delroy Chuck for years and there are no errors, and you confirm that, then we don't expect to have, or we don't envisage to have much issues there. But we expect to have issues with addresses, issues with telephone numbers and so on. But the continuous vetting process in the background will
I think
correct
this
that.
is important to note, you see, because speaking personally, my name has come out so many times as Detroy, Delroy Church.
Okay.
And I mean, you keep correcting persons to say you're putting the wrong information. So you don't want a national identification where you get a card with wrong information.
Yes.
So I just want to be public at large to be assured that there will be many layers of checks and balances. So when the card is finally delivered, it has the right information.
Yes.
But if it does have the wrong information, it can be corrected.
Yes, there is a process. In fact, even in the bill, there is a process for the correction of information.
Okay.
So we always have to have those controls in place, because we do know of people with errors on their birth certificates, and
exactly.
for whatever reason they continue that way, and sometime in the future they say, you know what, I need to change it. But we do have processes in place at the civil registry to change the name. In fact, there are also persons who will change their name via deed poll and so on, and we have to take all of those into consideration. So, but the key thing, however, to note is that in a system of this nature, your real identity is really your biometric, your facial image, and your fingerprints, because those are very difficult to change. And but all of the other attributes, you can change them. You can change your name when you feel like. You can change your address. You can change your telephone number. But who you are, which is your
Is your
really your
biometric.
biometric, is very difficult to change, and that's a key point.
Wonderful.
Great. Thank you so much. And the minister wants to make doubly sure that there are systems in place to ensure the correctness of the information on the national ID card. So there was initially much concern about the type of information that citizens would be required to submit in order to enroll. Could you just itemize for us? I know you mentioned it earlier, but could you just itemize specifically what information citizens will be required to provide in order to enroll in the NIDS?
Okay. Do you want to take that, Sherry? Okay, thanks.
Of the bill, it speaks to the identity information that the authority may require of persons who are desirous of enrolling in the NIDS. And the information includes the biographic information of the individual, which includes the full name, date of birth, country of birth, place of birth, marital status, occupation, whether you're male or female, and so on, and biometric information, which means your facial image, your fingerprints within the meaning of the Fingerprint Act, and your manual signature if it is that you're an adult. And the authority may also require some reference numbers if they are applicable. For example, your TRN, your driver's license number, your passport number, your national insurance number, and so on.
What happens when the person renews their driver's license or passport and they get, for example, a different passport number, which is possible? You know, do they have to take it back to the authority to have the change made? I mean, it may be an older person. Do they have to wait the 15 years? Or can they change it if a number changes or an address changes during that period?
I can respond to that, Chairman. So the only attributes in the system that would consider to be fixed is your facial image,
okay,
your fingerprints, and the name. Those are the fixed attributes. Everything else can change. And in the bill, there are provisions in the bill, and Nadine, you can even comment on that, where the authority, you know, can check on these things to make sure that the database is updated. In fact, the authority, if the law is enacted in this form, will be mandated to ensure that the database is updated. Will be mandated to make sure that there are systems and processes in place and controls to make sure that the address is correct, that the reference numbers are in fact correct. So all of those things are in place. Nadine, you want to mention that any at all? Sorry to call on you.
Well, I was just affirm what you said about the need for the authority to verify all the information that the individual has given. And it is understood that life events will happen and that information provided at enrollment will change during a person's life. The scheme, though, requests of that individual for the information to be provided to the authority when these changes occur. And it is intended or expected that a very seamless procedure will be made possible by the authority for that kind of updating to be provided with the online resources that we now have, that it would not be something onerous, you know, that they have to go in and so.
So we want to tell the citizens that even after you get your ID, you will still have the opportunity to be in communication with the NERA. And in communication with the NERA, they can still not only check on any requests that have been made of their information, but they can also update their information. Good.
In some countries, it's a requirement by law for the citizens to update their address information. The system is being designed for the citizens to be able to update their addresses remotely. And that is very important. And I also need to mention that we are aware, and that is why in the bill it says may, Nadine, correct me if I am wrong, it says, you know, all of the information, the identity information, the authority may collect those But the reason for this is because we are aware that there are persons without fingerprints. And we have special processes in place to treat with that. In fact, it's somewhere about, the data we have is somewhere about 20,000 Jamaicans that would be in that category, which is roughly about 0.6% of the population. So we have special controls in place to manage those risks.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So as has been explained, the information that is required, and just for clarity for the public, you will be required to provide biographic information and biometric information. Biometric information being your facial image, fingerprint, and your manual signature, and a reference number where applicable. And I was going to ask, what provisions will be made for persons who are unable to provide a fingerprint? Could you tell us what provisions exist to facilitate those persons?
So, while we don't want to get into the inner details for security reasons, because you do have persons who will want to attempt to cheat the system, and they are not in those categories. So I would prefer not to disclose the inner workings, but what we can say to the public is that there are clear processes in place to ensure that we exempt persons that are in those categories. In fact, the Disabilities Association, we will partner also, because there are persons, we have to ensure that any form of disabilities that somebody don't turn up to the authority and say, I can't do this because I have this disability. We're going to have to validate all of those. Naturally, if you see someone step to the enrollment center and the person don't have any hands, then it's a given. But there are some disabilities that will have to definitely be verified before we proceed, because the officers at the enrollment sites, they are not medical doctors, so they will have to depend on a third party for the verification.
Mrs. Allison, you wanted to add something?
To Warren's point, there are provisions in place in the bill. So, for example, if you look at clause 11(1)(b), fingerprints, it cross-references the Fingerprints Act. And in the Fingerprints Act, fingerprint includes a palm print or a footprint. So this basically means that if there are no fingers available to extract a fingerprint, then the law provides for a palm print or a footprint to be taken in its stead.
Right, thank you so much. So a very inclusive process where no one will be left behind. So if you are, by virtue of any issues, unable to provide a fingerprint, you need not fret. There are provisions made for you. I just wanted to ask, though, from the time that I apply or take steps to enroll in the NIDS, how long does it take for me to get my card in hand?
So when you talk about time frame for the delivery of services, you're really talking about the service level agreement. So while the NERA will provide several services, such as renewal of cards, new enrollment, the replacement of lost cards, and all of those, we have to tie all of those to what we call service level agreements. We do have models that we looked at, and what the models are telling us now, based on our estimates, is that we can deliver identification cards between 1 to 7 business days. But naturally, the exact time frame or the exact service level agreement is something that will have to be considered by the Board of Management and approved by the Board of Management once the authority is established, because the service level agreements will definitely be tied to performance standards for the CEO and also the staff of the authority. But for now, the baseline is that our models are showing us that it is possible to generate and to produce those cards between 1 to 7 business days.
1 to 7 business days. That is quite impressive, and we know the process of getting your IDs in Jamaica can be quite lengthy, so that is definitely very good to hear. Yesterday we learned about storage, and I just wanted to talk about that a little bit more, particularly about how the data, the information collected, will be stored at the authority once collected.
want me to take that one
Yes.
first? Okay, thanks. So, again, what we can say is that the data collected will be stored in a secured government facility. We can also say that every verification, every disclosure concerning identity information will be audited, and those audit logs will be protected by blockchain. And this is very important because we're trying to establish a system here for transparency. And for the first time, we want to ensure that every time your identity information is disclosed, is verified, you will know. Because by the very nature of the officers that will be engaged by the authority, they are going to be in the background performing certain functions and tasks that are required to deliver the services. So they may have to access data, but that access will be logged and will be protected. And I know Chairman mentioned earlier in the week that there are some big fines if you touch something and you are not authorized to.
Okay, thank you. Thank you ever so much, Mr. Vernon. I just want to remind our viewers to peruse the NIDS bill on the websites of the Jamaican Parliament and on the Ministry of Justice. And yesterday, Minister Chuck indicated that the bill will be made available through WhatsApp, so it will be widely circulated for your consideration and review.
Of the peace.
And to through your justices of the peace. That is correct. I believe yesterday we got as far as clause 22, so we're just going to take some time and now proceed to go through the rest of the clauses that we have on schedule for today. Could you please, Mrs. Miller, continue by picking up at clause 23?
Thank you for that, Kimberly. Good afternoon, Chairman, other members of the committee, colleagues, and the general public. In respect of clause 23, it speaks to the security of information. Very important clause. This clause provides for the authority to ensure that the information stored in the national databases is kept in a secure manner and that the confidentiality of the information is preserved. It also ensures that the authority shall take all necessary steps and measures to protect the information from unauthorized access, use, and disclosure, to ensure that its employees and agents comply with these measures, to ensure that the identity information of enrolled individuals accords with the highest level of security, and to implement systems to detect any unauthorized access to or use of the information, to implement monitoring processes to identify any unusual events, to encrypt all such information containing biometrics or other identity information, to restrict the categories of its staff and agents having access to the national databases, and to take all necessary steps to ensure that the physical security of the servers of the national databases and to employ any backup measures where necessary. So these form the provisions of the security of the information.
Thank you so much. Mr. Vernon, may I ask you, what do we mean when we say that the information will be encrypted? What does that mean?
So I think the simplest way to put it is that when you encrypt the information, it's as if you put it in a safe, and there's a key that will give you access to the key, and you have specific persons, or a specific individual with that key, and only that individual is able to open.
Right.
And to open it using that key is more like you're decrypting the information.
Right.
I think that's the most relevant way to do it.
All right. So basically, your information will be so secure. It would be very, very difficult, and only a small number of very special people will be able to access that information. I'm looking here at Clause 25, which seems to speak to authentication. Mrs. Miller, could you walk us through Clause 25, please?
Well, Kimberly. In respect of Clause 25, it speaks to the request for information or for authentication and verification services. This clause provides the authority to authenticate a national identification card or a national identification number, or to verify the identity information of an enrolled individual at the request of that individual or an accredited third party with the consent of that individual. This clause also makes provision for a person to apply to be an accredited third party. Furthermore, when an individual makes an application to the authority to this effect, that individual is entitled to be provided by the authority with the following information. 1, a statement of all the information stored in the national databases about that individual, and a record of all the requests made by entities for verification of identity information of that individual.
Awesome. Yes. All right. I'm going to ask a question now from social media, and it is actually from Facebook, and Monique is asking, would the NIDS be like a social security card number or a social security card as in the United States?
Thank you, Kimberly. The NIDS card, or the National Identification Card, maybe we can say that there are some similarities. Specifically, your social has 9 digits, and the National Identification Card, similar to TRN, will also, will come with 9 digits. However, the National Identification Card is completely unique and it's different from that. And it's completely unique because of the various security elements that are attached to it. With the National Identification Card, it guarantees one person to one identity, guarantees one person to one birth certificate. I am not sure if your social security number, based on the number of fraud cases reported, that they are doing the same thing. But to speak specifically that the National Identification Card and the number and all of the components is significantly different. In fact, the social will not give you access to certificates for you to be able to sign documents digitally, and the ability to authenticate, meaning to sign into services online. A National Identification Card, again, will give you certificates on the card, the ability for you to sign into services, and the ability for you to use it for digital signature, to sign contracts and so on online. So it's very important to note those.
Okay. Thank you so much. I invite you once again to participate on social media using the hashtag JSCNIDS, and please continue to send your questions. We do have the experts here to respond to them, as well as your suggestions for consideration. We do have another question, and it is on Facebook, and it's from Shalimar Blair. And Shalimar wants to know, with this ID, does it remove the need to get your photos certified by a JP for the purposes of your passport and driver's licenses?
So I want to maybe respond to that question this way. We will need the help of the JPs to verify who you are initially to get in the system. However, what you are going to get from the system some level of efficiency, because there's no need for you to go back to the JP every time to verify who you are. So I think that's the important point to note.
Okay.
That we will need the JPs initially to get you in, to verify who you are. But once you're in, there's no need to keep on going to the JP to verify who you are. You can use the card.
If I may just say,
Yes.
you had linked it to the passport, I believe. You had linked the photographs to an issue of a passport.
To the issue of renewing your passport.
Renewing
you need to
a passport.
Verify, right.
But the processes for the NIDS are different from that of a passport. The PICA will still have their requirements for a passport. The two are not to be confused. They're completely different.
Okay.
But I think what is important is, firstly, to get the NIDS card, various checks will be done, including a JP authenticating or verifying who you are. That will be matched against a passport if you have one, a driver's license, your birth certificate, other means of identification, including checks with the TRN, so that once you have the card, it will be unique with a NIN, a National Identification Number. Now, with a renewal of a passport, we hope that PICA will not require that you get your passport verified again, your photograph, because you could easily check it against your NIN, your National Identification Card. And also, one would hope that PICA would ask you for another original birth certificate, because in the issuing of the card, that would have been checked. So what we have said before, that the card will allow cardholders to access government service, private services easier and more efficiently.
The registry also makes it possible for NERA to issue this card with the full resource of the contents of the civil registry, supporting the information that's on that card. So there's no need to look beyond that information to request a birth certificate.
Minister Johnson-Smith, you wanted to add something?
Moderator team, and of course all our listeners and viewers on social media and elsewhere. Maybe what I'm saying is exactly what's been said before, which is that the NIDS is intended to make life easier. So if you have your NID, that is, if you have your NIC, your National Identity Card, then gone will be the days for you of having to find 2 bills in your name to prove your address, plus getting your 2 photos signed by a JP, plus ensuring that you have at least 2 government IDs, one with a picture, so you have to be looking for the voter ID or the driver's license and the TRN or the passport, and gone will be those days, because all of the verification will have been done at the initial stage when you enroll in the system. So because the system is now voluntary, it's not mandatory anymore, it will mean that companies and the government certainly will, until the enrollment reaches a particular level, there will have to be more than one system, so that people who, without a NID, without a national identity card, will still be able to access services. But what you will find is that the speed and ease with which you are able to access services will be different. So you will go to a company, a bank, a furniture store, whatever, and the credit line with a NID, with a national identity card, you're going to be getting through like this. And the person who is having to carry the 10 pieces of documentation and have somebody verifying everything instead of just clickety-click, check with the NERA, come back, and you're verified. So the speed and efficiency of your process will change. So I'm hoping this helps you understand what not only the vision, but what the processes will be like. So it's intended that it will be incentive-led. So the ease will make you sign up more because you will see the difference in service facilitation and service delivery with your national identity card, with all your verification having been done upfront, and then having to do it each time with verified documents each time.
Thank you very much, Senator Minister Johnson Smith. The truth of the matter, there are persons listening and viewing who may have heard this before, but please bear with us. There are many others who have not heard it. And it is very important for us, members of the committee, members of the technical team from the Office of the Prime Minister, the fact that we are repeating these things several times. We want to let the public at large know. We just want others who have not heard. And indeed, you're going to hear the same points that we are making this evening, repeated over and over, not only in committee meetings, not only in the virtual town hall meetings, when we speak to private sessions, when we advertise later on. This is very important because at the end of the day, we know, having, well, at least the team who have been in discussion with us at the legislation committee, we know that the card will make it better for the citizens of Jamaica to access services. And that's the point we're repeating.
Thank you so much, Minister. And thank you so much, Minister Johnson Smith. The card will change the way we do business and access essential services. And that is truly, truly life-changing in a very positive way. Allow me to take the time to acknowledge Honorable Ministers Favour Williams and Robert Nesta Morgan, who are tuned in via our Zoom link. And with that said, we do have a question posted on Twitter by Craig Diedrich, and he used the hashtag JCNIDS, which we continue to encourage you to use. And Craig wants to know, will the NIN at any time seek to replace a person's TRN, NIS, passport, or driver's license numbers? And I pose this question to the technical team. Could you say?
So I think the best way to answer this question is that the intent of the National Identification System, and even the NIN, is that once you have the NIN, there is no need for you to produce any other numbers to the various government entities. But we also need to be aware that those government entities will have their own unique identifier. Some of those unique identifiers, you may not know them, and maybe there is no need for you to know it. If you have a national identification number, there may very well be no need for you to know what your tax unique identifier is because of the linkages. There is no need for you to know what your NIS would be. There is no need for you to know the unique identifier that they are using for PAT, because remember, we have a distributed system. We have different ministries and agencies that are governed a particular way, and they have their databases. But the key thing as an engineer is that you must have a universal unique identifier, and this is where the NIN is. So we are not saying that it's going to get rid of them. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Senator O'Neill would like to just...
The question as to whether we will do away with particular cards, actually there are two questions. One, legally we won't, because NIDS is not mandatory. But in practice, what's going to happen? In 3-4 years, I don't know, maybe less, I would hope as quickly as possible, many people will move, and when I say many people, I mean many institutions, just like Minister Johnson Smith just said, will tend to require only one ID if they're convinced that A, it really does identify the person before you, and they can continuously over a long period of time believe in that identity, because it's not, NIDS is not going to change. So in time, in practice, if not in law, the NIDS will become the premier identification that most anybody will tend to ask you for, which is why you should try and get your NIDS card as quickly as possible. So you stop carrying passport around, TR and all that. You have that. You have NIDS everybody will be able to identify you. So in practice, it will probably, those other pieces of identification will fall away.
Thank you so much, Minister. And another question we have is, I think people are trying to figure out, why do we need another card? We have so many other identifiers. And one question posted by Iris Finch is, why not just convert the national insurance scheme to incorporate this change? Why do we need another identification card altogether?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, and so there are two things to consider. Some of those questions are what you call maybe policy questions, but I will speak from an engineer perspective. When you're looking at system design, is that what you need is a universal, unique identifier. A universal, unique identifier that at all times you will know that this is in fact a representation of a real person behind a process. Very important. All of the identification cards that we have now, we can't say to the public completely that at all times this is an exact representation of the person before you. And there are a number of reasons for that. Some of them, one, have to do with the way how they were designed and the vetting processes behind them. Where the national ID is concerned is that you're designing business processes and controls and vetting and quality assurance where all of the numbers that are going to be issued will go through the same standard or process. And the linkages between your civil registry information, which will account now for those life events and the changes where identity is concerned, we really don't have that. In fact, none of the IDs that we consider to be national IDs will give you the capabilities to use electronic signature. None of those IDs will give you the capabilities to utilize a card to authenticate or to sign into a system. None of those. Okay. So the NIDS is completely unique, and it's important to note that the NIDS is for all from birth. Right. The other identification cards, they are for different segments of the population and for different purposes. And finally, the backbone or the systems that are designed for those, they were designed for different business processes, not for identity verification in a modern society. They were not designed that way. The national ID is completely different. It's been designed to facilitate authentication, the use of digital signature, to simplify everything, to ensure that data is captured once. It's very clear. With any of those IDs that you have now, you have to present them everywhere you go. And they have to collect the same information over and over. With a NIDS, you present that information once. You enroll once, you present the information once, information is vetted once, and you use it multiple times. So that's important.
Right, thank you. So centralization of the information, yes. So completely new, completely different, completely unique, and completely revolutionary. We do have a question here, and it's posed by somebody who is living overseas, and I believe we did address it yesterday, but there can be no harm in responding once again. And she wants to know, if you are a dual citizen, can you enroll in the NIDS?
And
yes.
And yes, once you're Jamaican.
Yes, we just want to make sure that we are responding to all the questions that are posed to us. All right. And so the other question, what are the circumstances, if at all, a person's data or information can be destroyed? What are the circumstances under which a person's information can be destroyed? And I want to ask if this would pertain for my personal information to if a person passes on, since we say that once a person dies, that number dies with them. Does it mean the information is then destroyed, or is it, how do we treat with that information?
I will start out on my and my legal, well, the lawyers will back me up, but
Yes.
you know, from in a technical context, when you collect information that is incorrect, or maybe you enroll someone that should not have been enrolled, or when someone cancels their enrollment, you will what we call purge that information from the system. However, it is also important to note that when you live in a state, there are no rules for you to forget the identity of an individual. There are no rules to say once you register at birth and you get your birth certificate, the state at some point in time must delete your civil registry information. So, as part of the National Identification Program, there are a couple of things that we are guaranteed. One is that your civil registration information or your birth certificate information will always be there. But we are also guaranteeing that once you register for a national ID, even if you decide to cancel your enrollment, that your identity will be secured, meaning that that identity will be sealed. All of your personal information will be removed from the system. So your telephone number, your address, all of that will be removed. And your identity will be secured and sealed. If you return to register, then that will trigger the authority to activate or to utilize the existing identity. And this is important to prevent identity theft. Otherwise, what you will do is allow someone to get into the system, and they then opt out of the system, and then you return with a new birth certificate. And this will compromise the entire system. So it's very important to note that.
Right. Thank you so much. I have a question here from JJ Mack, and I think this question is extremely important. And JJ wants to know, what if you have never been registered? The government has no record of you. How can you become enrolled in the NIDS?
So the first step, if you have never been enrolled, we must establish whether or not you were born in Jamaica. And there's a process from the civil registry side for late registration. And the government is also funding late registration for the poor and people who can't afford to get a birth certificate on our undocumented program. And very soon you'll hear more about that, where persons in those categories can go to the RGD and get a new birth certificate. And they have a complete process where they go into the communities, they go to churches, they go to schools, just to establish that you're in fact born within the community. And once they establish that and they complete their process, then you will receive your birth certificate. Once you receive the birth certificate, then the National ID program can now initiate the registration once you volunteer to get that done. Because remember, you can't get into the system if you don't have a birth certificate. And you can't get into the system if there is no record of you at the passport office, because you may have been born overseas and received citizenship from the passport office. Because the idea is, for security reasons, our enrollment officers will not be allowed to create a profile or to create an identity. That's very important. So when you talk about fraud, it's going to be very difficult. Fraud will have to be committed at the entry points, and there are a number of audit trails on track to really deal with that. And as the chairman mentioned, I keep saying it, there are really tough penalties and fines. Chairman, you say it better than me, so you can say it.
The point about it is that once you try to defraud the system, the law provides in several sections significant penalties, which we will be addressed to see if they can even be more severe, so that there will be deterrents to ensure that persons don't try to beat the system. I want to ask you, though, Executive Director, at birth, would a NIN be issued at birth, or do the child or the parents or guardian have to wait until the registration takes place?
So the the provisions in the bill is that you can enroll from birth, but for a minor, as you know, the parent would have to volunteer for that to be done.
So I'm really asking, when the parent comes to register the birth,
yes,
will that be an automatic registration of a NIN?
It will not be automatic because the entire program is a voluntary program. So
Right.
once the parent is in agreement for the NIN to be assigned, it will be assigned and the identity protected from birth.
So how will there be a connection, even at that early stage, between the birth certificate and the NIN? Would it not there be a good consistency to do it at an early stage once this NERA is in operation?
Absolutely, there is a need to, but again, we are operating in an environment where it is not mandatory, and
Right.
those are some of the risks that we have to manage. The reality is that if you decide not to, then we won't be able to enroll you or to secure that identity. But the ideal way to do it is that from birth is to make sure you make the connection from birth.
And just to go on, suppose once a person is enrolled, let us say I enroll later this year, wouldn't it be appropriate to put that NIN number attached to my birth certificate at the Registrar General?
Absolutely.
Is that likely? So that, I mean, 50 years' time when I'm no longer around, that if someone tries to use my birth certificate, you would see immediately that, in fact, there's someone that already enrolled known as Delroy Chuck.
Yes.
No, I'm just asking because, you see, it seemed to me that you need to do some matching so that once I am enrolled, then you should put my NIN number beside my birth certificate at the Registrar General, so that later on, when I passed away, if someone tries to use my birth certificate, it's clear that they can't because there's a number there already. Is that likely?
Well, Chairman, I am amazed with you going through the processes that we would have defined and based and very clear in terms of your assertions, and that is exactly what we have.
Right.
Is that when we talk about a universal identifier, once the connections are made, that is what will happen. And this is why, for the first time, once you establish that, we will now be in a position to link your birth certificate with your identity, with marriage record, and also with, all of the other civil events, such as death records and so on. And that is why we spoke about the benefits of the NIDS.
That's
to
right.
remove life certificates, to say to seniors and persons that are on the pension program that the possibility is there. It's just for government entities that are asking for life certificates for them to look at their business processes and to make those changes, because there is no need to ask for it, because the death will have to be registered in the civil registry, and once that is known, then identity will be aware, and you'll know that the person is no longer alive.
And I make this point because that will sort of encourage and educate the public at large to know why the NIN is so important. Because unlike the passport, the driver's license, electoral card, nothing relates back to the birth certificate.
Yes.
So with the NID, you know, once you get a number, that birth certificate is literally sanctioned, or should I say, neutralized, that only you can use it.
Absolutely.
If anyone else tries to use that birth certificate, immediately fraud will emerge, and that person could be charged and penalized under this act.
Yeah.
So it's important that the public at large appreciate how important the NIDS system will be.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Minister, for driving that point home. That is very, very reassuring. And also, those who can be reassured this evening are those persons whose births were never registered. You do not need to fret. You will not be excluded from the NIDS if you wish to become enrolled. We have a question here from Suzanne Goff on Twitter, and Suzanne is asking, and I believe since we have emphasized so much that the NIDS is voluntary, she's asking, will people be able to continue using their other IDs if they have them? It won't be a matter that in law NIDS is voluntary, but in practice it is mandatory. Will this also be clear in the laws and or regulations?
There are two parts to it. The system that we are designing and is that you will be able to continue functioning the way or you're functioning now with all of those efficient ways of doing things. So you will still be able to go in line at the tax office or government entities to conduct your business and drive in traffic. However, with a national ID, what we are giving you is a secure tool where at all times we know who is behind the process, who is behind the device, who is behind the computer screen. And the only way to know that is because of the security that we are putting in, and we are tying the biometric to that, linking it also to the ability to authenticate, connecting it back also to your public key infrastructure. So that is very, very important to differentiate. And I said this before, that what you're going to be able to do is that you're going to be able to bring all of these services online and to make them digital services, because there is no need to wonder who is behind the screen. That is why I mentioned before that you can have a Jamaican abroad and they will be able to sell their motor vehicle once those adjustments are made and those processes and the changes are applied. You'll be able to sell your motor vehicle online. Why? Because the national ID, at all times we know who is behind it because of the security features.
I think it's important to recognize that the government is doing this and is putting a lot of resources in ensuring the uniqueness of this national identification system. As Warren has pointed out, there will be several layers of verification to make sure that the identification is that of the person, so that the private sector, the public sector will have confidence in it, so that it will be used, that card you can use electronically, as we have said, to do a lot of business. And let us face it, right now, and even more so, as the months and years go by, a lot of transactions will be done electronically. You don't have to go there, but you could show the card, have it verified. That may not be possible with all the other cards. You see, so that there are other private sector, public sector might say, well, no, we can't accept that card. Unless you have the NIDS card, you have to come in. You have to come and verify your identification, so that the benefit will be enormous.
Yes. Ms. Wilkins.
Sir.
To be clear, that based on the question that was asked, that there are no provisions in the bill that bar the use of the existing cards, that limit their use in any way. The bill simply provides for the national identification card.
Right. Thank you so much. So the short answer, Ms. Goff, is that you will still be able to use your current IDs. However, you may find the process just a little bit more cumbersome, and that is what the NIDS will be eliminating. I also have a question here, and it speaks to voluntary withdrawal from the NIDS enrollment. So assuming that persons have heard about the NIDS and they have enrolled, it's very exciting, but they decide they no longer want to be part of the NIDS facility. Are there provisions for their withdrawal?
The answer is yes, because the provision, I think it's clause 14, provides that they can apply to deregister, but they must put it in writing and surrender the card at the same time. Now, if they don't have the card, they will have to pay it because it was lost. Right. Then they will have to pay to get a card, so it can be surrendered with the written application to deregister.
Right. All right. Thank you so much. And in respect of persons being unable, so for example, and this is a question from Twitter, you need to be verified in order to become enrolled, but you signed a certain way on all your previous documentation, but you can no longer sign that way. How do you treat with that? How do you go about verifying that individual?
So when you talk about manual signature, there's really no restriction in the bill manual signature. We are asking for a manual signature, and we expect that the signature that you will use is a signature that, that is your signature. So whatever manual signature is applied to that application form at the point of enrollment, that is what the system will use for verification for the signature moving forward, because people can change their signature. The only thing we are saying is that the signature that you submit to the authority will always be the signature that we'll use to verify your manual signature. And that is important because that signature will also be printed on the card. Mm-hmm. So if you take the card to an establishment to verify who you are, then naturally that establishment would require you to sign the same way as it is on the card. And there are experts that can verify that.
All right, thank you so much. What of persons who want to know what about the validity period? So we did answer this question yesterday, but if you could go ahead and talk about the validity period of the cards and why it is that it is established in that manner.
You want to come in? Okay, let Janelle do it. Okay.
Yes, and you mentioned yesterday why it was established in this fashion. I believe it was Mr. Vernon who explained why we had these varying periods of validity. Could you just recount that for us?
Yes, just to repeat, between from birth all the way to 18, the features often, the features change quite often. And that is why we utilize the existing standard in government for passport, where every 5 years you will facilitate the renewal. Mm-hmm. But for adults from 18 to 60, it's every 10 years. Right. Because believe it or not, persons within that age group, you tend to see changes over 10 years. The before and the after, and you see quite a number of those pictures on social media. And also when you get to 60 and above, the features, usually change between 15 years. So that is why we adopted those standards.
Okay, thank you so much. So again, the periods of validity for the card are 5, 10, and 15 years, depending on various where you are when you received your card. All right, thank you so much. I have a question from Pierre Parkins, and I will be wrapping in just a minute. What is the minimum age that biometric information can be collected, and does it have to be updated on a schedule?
A very good question. So the minimum age to collect the biometric information is from age 6, and that's for the fingerprints. However, the system is capable of capturing a facial image from birth. Okay. And the reason for this is because the quality of the fingerprint at that age is usually not good, and you renew every 5 years.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much. And we still have persons who are saying, based on my research, fingerprints are to be collected from people who are criminals. Why do I have to submit my fingerprint in order to be enrolled in the NIDS? Why do I have to do this? So could you please tell us why the fingerprint is so essential to the NIDS?
And let me use an example. When you travel, when you travel and you move through the various borders, they capture your fingerprints. And I would have traveled before, and I'm not a criminal. There are a lot of Jamaicans who would have traveled before, and they capture your fingerprints at the borders. And the reason for this is because they are trying to achieve the same thing that we are trying to achieve, is to ensure the uniqueness of all of the individuals, to ensure that they know who you are, and they can only know that using your fingerprints and your facial image. It's very important to note that. And it's the same thing we're trying to accomplish. Right? We spoke earlier in the town halls about the number of fraud cases because we are unable to at all time to guarantee the uniqueness of the card.
Yes. Thank you so much.
And to the questioner, fingerprint is actually unique to the individual. In fact, twins, not even twins, have the same fingerprints. So that why fingerprint is used to identify not only criminals, but generally persons, is that the uniqueness of the fingerprint. And it is a fact, one of the reasons why the electoral system has now been so regularized and so safe is that they have used fingerprints to ensure that there's no dual registration. And so having that experience, we know that the fingerprint in the national identification system will assist with the uniqueness of the person, and in addition to the facial recognition, which is now also recognized as another unique way of identifying individuals, that will ensure that this system is really secure, safe, and also providing for good identifications of persons.
Thank you so much, Minister. And with just 2 minutes to go, I wish to acknowledge Minister Johnson-Smith for a quick comment.
Thanks. I really just wanted to express it in another way again. It's for your security. It's for your security. It's to prevent identity theft. When you hear in other jurisdictions about rises in identity theft, you'll find that the numbers are higher in countries where their identification has no unique identifier like a fingerprint. So it is one of the ways in which we intend that the national identity card will be secure and your identity cannot be stolen. You all know that we're living more and more in a digital world, in a digital economy, that you need to be able to protect your identity in a digital space. And having your identity number, your NIN, and your card linked to your fingerprint is just one of the ways in which this system will protect you from identity fraud.
Thank you so much, Minister. It is indeed for your protection. We have come to the end of today's discussion. We invite you to continue the conversation online using the hashtag JCNIDS. I'm Kimberly McLeod. That's all from me today, and I'm handing you now to our chairman.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. Excellent job you've done once again as moderator. I'd just like to thank our viewers and listeners who have been with us. I just want to remind everyone that this, in fact, is a joint sitting of the Joint Select Committee and the National Identification and Registration System. You will want to thank Ministers Johnson Smith, Orvin Hill, Marsha Smith, and MP Dwight Sibbles. It's interesting, you may not know, but usually I try to have 5 members of the committee here, 4 plus myself, to say that at least at the banquet hall at Jamaica House, we do have a quorum. But most other members have joined us online. But I like at least to show publicly that they're sitting. We have quorate. We have a quorum. And I also like to thank the secretary who I have not introduced before, Grayson Morrison, who you see sitting with us at the 4th virtual town hall. And the stenographers are here. They our good
interpreter.
And our interpreter is there with us. We want to thank you for being with us. And we want to thank the NIDS team, the OPM technical team and NIDS. And we want to thank you for being with us. Next week, we are going to repeat some of the clauses, but we will finish up the other clauses that we have not yet dealt with. I think we have gone to clause 25. We have 34 in all. Those are not necessarily expansive, so we will touch on them and also elaborate a bit more on the schedules. So we ask those members who have listened, if you want to join us again, please do so. But pass on the word to other members of the public to let them know they can get additional information on this very important bill, important for every citizen of Jamaica, because we feel that this NIDS system will make life easier for the citizens of Jamaica. So this is the end of the fourth session, virtual town hall meeting, and I now ask for motion for adjournment. Motion approved. The meeting of the Joint Select Committee is now adjourned until next week, Wednesday, same time at 5:30.
The new NIDS bill has been drafted and is ready for review. We want to hear from you. Go to www.japarliament.gov.jm to download a copy of the new bill. Join the conversation. Make a written submission to Clerk to the Houses, Gordon House, 81 Duke Street, Kingston, or via email clark@japarliament.gov.jm. All written submissions must be sent by Friday, January 29, 2021. Join the process. Let your voice be heard.